Welcome to our Alumni Nutrition Talks series, a celebration of 40 years of training nutritional therapists. I'm Heather Rosa, the Dean, and I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Hello, welcome. My name is Moira Newiss. I'm a registered nutritional therapist and health coach. I'm here today to help the Institute of Optimum Nutrition to celebrate their 40th birthday, and to do so by talking to you about how a ketogenic diet can help with conditions like ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, as well as mental health conditions like depression. In this talk, I'm going to explain what might be going on in your brain and your body with your energy production if you have one of these conditions, why this is so important to understand, and how a ketogenic diet might help tackle some of these issues. And finally, give you some practical tips on how you can get started yourself. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about me. I trained at ION whilst I was still recovering from both chronic fatigue and mental health problems. I was a lot better already, but still struggling without as much energy as I would like to have. Whilst I was training, I discovered a fascinating science about how a high-fat, very low-carbohydrate diet, which is a ketogenic diet, could help prevent and reverse many different chronic diseases. I became totally fascinated and spent a lot of time researching it in depth and doing more specialist training to become an expert in this field. It truly is my passion. Not only did this dietary approach get me more energy than I even knew was possible, but it's helped other family members resolve their health problems too. And of course, since then, I've helped many clients also. When I was ill, I struggled simply to get off the sofa. I couldn't look after my kids or do the housework. I had to stop work. I felt like I might be getting dementia as my brain just didn't seem to be working properly. I had anxiety, severe brain fog, palpitations, depersonalisation, and more besides. And as I learned more about how to optimize my diet and lifestyle, I gradually got better. But then, when I found a ketogenic diet, it was like a light bulb had been turned on again. I finally had boundless energy. I could climb the mountains and race my bike. The day I knew I'd finally cracked it, I cycled 100 kilometres in less than 5 hours in the Loch Ness ETAP, crossing the finishing line with tears running down my face, tears of joy, because I was so emotional knowing I'd cracked it. Now, I guess if you're listening to this, that either you or a loved one is struggling with fatigue or a mental health problem. And what I want more than anything is for you to have a similar experience and for this talk to make a real difference to you. From the start, I want to stress this talk is all about getting your energy back, whether that's physical energy, so you can go back to work, go for a walk, ride your bike, or whether it's brain energy, so your brain is working optimally again. We often divide the body and the mind, but when it comes down to the level of our cells, which is where our energy is made, it's the same processes we're talking about, whether it's a brain cell, like a neuron, or a muscle cell. Problems with energy production are now widely accepted as being key to physical conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID, as well as mental health conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. In different people, problems with energy production and use result in a different set of symptoms. So how might you recognize if you have problems with energy production in the body? Well, it goes back to some of the signs and symptoms I mentioned earlier, like you're struggling just to get dressed, to do the shopping, to cook your meals, look after your children, or you simply feel exhausted. You might feel like there's something wrong with your mental health, you feel down, unmotivated, you find no pleasure in anything, or perhaps like you've been drugged or you're stuck in a thick fog, like the world is going on around you, passing you by, or that you can't remember things properly, like people's names, or maybe that you might make a mistake when calculating something. Perhaps you feel like you've hit rock bottom and you just don't know why. You're simply completely physically and mentally exhausted, like you've been knocked down and can't get up again. You may have had a virus and never fully recovered. You might just have been left with an ongoing chronic fatigue you can't resolve no matter what you try. These are all signs that there's something wrong with the way that your body is producing energy. And energy problems are difficult to diagnose and treat, which is why your blood tests may well have all come back normal, and your GP might not be sure how to help you. You might be offered a drug even though you're not sure you need it or want it, because there's very little, or because there's a lack of knowledge generally about how lifestyle changes can help optimize energy production at a cellular level. So when we develop an energy problem, it's often due to a combination of factors that put us at more risk. And that might include things like having a virus, or eating a diet that's high in inflammatory foods, or being mentally or emotionally stressed, being exposed to chemicals, not being active enough, or perhaps even overdoing the exercise. I believe it's a bit like a game of dominoes, and eventually enough things happen to tip the balance and the whole lot falls down. And when this happens, there's a detrimental effect on our metabolism, and our body gets stuck in a defensive mode. We find it difficult to get out of it. Our body's holding us back from recovering as normal. So what then is metabolism? Well, metabolism is a word that describes how your body processes everything that you put into it or do to it. And that includes the food you eat, the oxygen you breathe, as well as chemicals and viruses and bacteria that you're exposed to in your environment. Your body has to deal with all these things, and metabolism is just a word for all the processes going on, including making energy, building and repairing tissues, defending the body against unwanted microbes, getting rid of toxins. It's a complicated process known collectively as metabolism. One of the key metabolic processes, however, is how your food is turned into energy, which in turn fuels all the many thousands of reactions that are going on every second in your body. If your metabolism isn't working effectively, it can create havoc with your health, and it usually results in less energy and more inflammation. And this ends up as a bit of a vicious circle, as inflammation leads to energy production being turned down further. Now, you might be thinking, how does this relate to chronic fatigue and mental health? Well, let's get down to the practical nature of what's going on in your cells to make energy. In your cells, you have tiny little organelles called mitochondria, which make your energy. And they use glucose or fat, as well as oxygen, to produce a fuel called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And that's what your body uses to run all these thousands of chemical reactions that you need to survive and thrive. Each ATP molecule is then recycled up to 1,000 or 1,500 times per day. And in total, your body creates an amount of ATP each day that's equivalent to your body weight, which is a pretty amazing fact, especially since we don't even know it's happening, as it gets used up as quickly as it's produced. Plus, you have a lot more mitochondria in areas of your body that need a lot of energy. So in particular, your heart, liver, kidneys, muscles, and brain. In fact, a single neuron in your brain can have 1 million mitochondria because they need that much energy to function effectively. Now, we know you make your ATP in your mitochondria, and that's your main energy source. And you produce a lot of it when everything's working well with your metabolism. But if your mitochondria come under any kind of stress, they turn down their energy production. The stress is any physiological stress that you experience. Now, that can be mental or emotional, which is what we usually think of stress as. But actually, it can also be physical, things like being over or underweight, or too hot or too cold, or having a high or low blood sugar. Or it could be an environmental stress, like being exposed to chemicals or low oxygen levels. And these stresses are all just turned into chemical signals in the bloodstream that your mitochondria listen and respond to. And if they're not happy and they sense danger, they will turn down energy production. If you think about it, you can probably remember a time when you were ill and you felt like sleeping all day. And that's because your mitochondria turned down their energy production because the focus was on defense and fighting off that virus or bacteria and conserving your energy. So it's the same process that's happening with chronic fatigue and mental health problems, when there's insufficient ATP to meet our energy needs. Let's look at what's happening when we make ATP in a little bit more detail. ATP is made up of one molecule of adenosine and 3 phosphates. And energy gets released when it's converted to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which has 2 phosphates, so one is removed. And the mitochondria recycle it back to ATP and it can be used again. And the recycling usually happens really quickly, but if for some reason it slows down, then there'll be an energy problem in the brain or body or both. And when that happens when our cells become physiologically stressed and energy demands are greater than what can be supplied. Then what can happen is another phosphate molecule is taken off ADP to make AMP or adenosine monophosphate. This supplies some extra energy, but it's actually a metabolic disaster, as AMP cannot be recycled and ATP needs to be made from scratch, which takes much longer. And the other problem is that if the cells are short of ATP, they can make small amounts outside of the mitochondria in a process known as glycolysis, converting glucose to lactic acid. It's an anaerobic process, meaning it takes place without oxygen. But unfortunately, although it provides some energy in the form of ATP in the short term, it takes more ATP than it produces for the lactic acid to be recycled, leaving a deficit. This energy deficit can take minutes or even hours or days to resolve. And studies have shown that people with chronic fatigue and mental health conditions have less mitochondrial capacity, which means they make less ATP, and they have less ability to recycle and recover ATP. And the studies also show elevated levels of glucose and lactate in these people, indicating higher levels of glycolysis, suggesting again that the mitochondria are not working so effectively. And this means less energy to power your cells, whether it's the neurons in your brain or the muscles in your legs or your heart. So next, let's talk a little bit about inflammation. There are many studies showing that people with chronic fatigue conditions and mental health conditions have raised levels of inflammation. Inflammation is a response that happens when the immune system recognizes damage is happening to a tissue. It could be from an injury, an illness, or a chemical toxin. Sometimes the injury can be tissue damage happening on the inside of our body from reactive high-energy molecules that are created by internal chemical reactions. To help you understand this, let's just think for a moment about what happens when you sit in the sun too long and your skin burns and becomes inflamed. That's because highly reactive molecules in the sun's rays are hitting your skin. And the same thing can be happening inside of us when chemical reactions create highly reactive molecules, which, just like the sun, can cause tissue damage and inflammation. Again, this could be the brain or the body. So to dampen down that inflammation, our body is going to use our own internally produced antioxidant enzymes, including powerful ones like glutathione and superoxide dismutase, which can help neutralize them. When the mitochondria are not working well, there's an increased production of these damaging, highly reactive molecules, which contributes to more chronic inflammation in a vicious circle. So now we've looked at the processes that are going on in the body in terms of energy production and inflammation. Let's look at how changing what you eat can help to tackle these. So our diet can impart our energy through the type of macronutrients we consume as well as the micronutrients. We have three macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And the micronutrients include essential vitamins and minerals that we need in small amounts. We want to ensure we provide our body with the best nutrients to maximize our ATP production and mitochondrial health and to keep inflammation at bay. In my view, the best dietary approach for this is a ketogenic diet. So let's find out more about it. What is a ketone and what is ketosis? Well, your body makes ketones when you eat a diet that's high enough in fat and low enough in carbohydrates for your liver to convert the fat into ketones, which you then burn for energy. Many of our tissues, including our brain, prefers to run on ketones and not glucose, like you might have been led to believe. So the liver makes ketones and they're transported into the bloodstream to cells, and then they're fed into the energy production process in the mitochondria. One of the biggest benefits of a ketogenic diet is that more energy gets produced due to their chemical structure. And as a result, we make more ATP. A famous study was done where it was found that a heart's function could be increased by 28% on ketones compared to glucose due to the increased ATP production. So when you eat a diet that's ketogenic and it puts you into a state of ketosis, you're burning ketones for your fuel, you'll be producing more energy to fuel all the processes going on in your body and your brain. An additional benefit is that ketones burn using less oxygen. And this is very helpful when oxygen availability might be limited, say like in a brain injury or during ischemia where there's a lack of oxygen getting to the heart. And there are some studies showing reduced blood oxygen levels might be an issue in chronic fatigue, long COVID, and some mental health conditions too. Another benefit of producing energy from ketones is that it's actually a much simpler process. So there's much less chance of it going wrong. The process uses fewer biochemical steps than burning glucose, requiring only 3 enzymes compared with 11 for glucose. And why else might ketones be helpful? Well, when ketones are burned, there are actually more reactive oxygen species produced in the short term, but in turn, this produces a process called mitohormesis, which is a useful adaptive process that has the overall effect of producing more of our own antioxidant enzymes, like the glutathione and superoxide dismutase that I mentioned earlier. This helps mop up these high energy molecules and overall results in a significant anti-inflammatory effect. And in addition, the ketone body, beta-hydroxybutyrate, can also act as a signaling molecule to directly increase the levels of these enzymes and neutralize damaging reactive molecules. So all in all, ketones can have a really big anti-inflammatory effect, which is why people who adopt a ketogenic diet for conditions like fatigue or mental health often find they get an improvement in other conditions too. For example, inflammatory symptoms like joint pain can resolve. Now, finally, what do you need to do to get into ketosis? First, I want to stress this is generic information and not personal medical advice, and working with a nutritional therapist who specializes in ketogenic diets is advised. Some medical conditions mean a ketogenic diet is not suitable for you. And if you're on any medication, then you need to seek medical advice, as prescriptions often need to be changed either before you start or adjusted as your metabolism improves. But in general, you need to be eating more fat and less carbohydrates. Protein intake is usually moderate. It can often stay around the same. I always suggest that people move initially towards a low carbohydrate approach, and that means less than 130 grams of carbohydrates a day. You need to be eliminating all the added sugars from the diet and cutting back and eventually eliminating starchy foods like rice, pasta bread, cereals, as well as starchy root vegetables like potatoes and sweet potatoes. You will also need to increase your fat intake. This could be from choosing fattier cuts of meat, like pot belly, or oily fish like salmon and mackerel, or fat-rich foods like hard cheese, double cream, Brazil nuts, macadamia nuts, for example. And you can add fat when you're cooking, like any natural fat is good, like butter, coconut oil, beef tallow, ghee, and you can add fat to salads or onto cooked vegetables like olive oil, avocado oil. Some people feel a lot better when they go low carb, and they don't necessarily need to go to the next step of being ketogenic. But ketogenic means dropping your carbohydrate intake below 50 grams a day. And usually initially it actually needs to go below 20 grams to push your body into a state of ketosis where you're producing ketones. It can take anything from a few days to a couple of weeks to get into ketosis, depending on how well you manage to balance your fat and your carbohydrate intake. Sometimes during this period, people can feel a little bit more fatigued. They might get a headache or sometimes experience muscle cramps. And this is known as the keto flu. It usually passes within a few days, and it's important to stay well hydrated and add a little more salt to your food, as you will lose more water and salt from the body. Also, I tend to advise my clients to avoid strenuous exercise for at least a couple of weeks, as this will make it more difficult to get into ketosis if you're doing that. You'll go through a period of keto adaptation, which is when your body is changing your metabolism from running on glucose to running on fat. It's also helpful when you first start a keto approach to test your keto levels so you can correct your diet quickly to get into ketosis. You can do this with urine sticks or with a breath monitor, but I usually prefer to do it with a finger prick blood monitor, which measures both glucose and ketones. How quickly you notice the difference that a ketogenic diet makes does vary between people. Some people notice it in just a couple of days, and for other people, it can take longer, up to a few weeks. Clients I've worked with usually get to the point where they just instinctively know that they're in ketosis because they simply feel better and their symptoms are reduced or disappear entirely. You might notice that I've potentially talked about the ketogenic diet as a therapy, and that's because it was originally used to treat epilepsy before medications were available, and it's still used in that field. But now the ketogenic diet is being used to help reverse and manage many other medical conditions, including mental illness. There are trials showing that in many cases, this diet can reverse conditions in situations where people have not found any relief with drugs, for example, with depression and bipolar disorder. And because of this, it's called a ketogenic metabolic therapy. In conclusion, I simply want to say that I'm a firm believer that optimizing your metabolism by improving your energy production and reducing inflammation is essential for optimal health. And this includes both mental and physical health. There's a lot of funding from the government in the UK and from philanthropic organisations that are looking to do more research into this area and best consider how ketogenic therapies can be used to help people more widely. I'm really excited about the future. I'm hoping that we'll see big changes and begin to see the NHS implementing ketogenic diets as a mainstream therapy. But meanwhile, you are the lucky ones because you found out about this therapeutic potential already. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'm Moira Newiss. I'm a nutritional therapist specialising in ketogenic diets, and you can find me at www.moiranewis.co.uk or look me up as Moira Newiss on Instagram and Facebook. I'd love to be able to help you, so if you would like to have a free call with me to discuss your personal situation and see what the best options for you might be, then you can book this on my website. I've also got some interesting blogs and some free downloads that you can access too. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you all the best on your own health journey that hopefully leads you back to optimal health. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this presentation, then click on the link in the description to subscribe to our Nutrition Talks email list. And don't forget to click the like button and subscribe.